24 hours, 3 developments, and together they paint a picture that the official narrative actively tries to obscure. First, Donald Trump publicly threatens to pull the United States out of NATO, and adds, almost casually, that he doesn't need Congress to do it. Second, pro-war commentators are celebrating a 90% drop in Iranian missile launches, calling it proof that Iran is being crushed. It is not. Analyzed correctly, that statistic reveals the exact opposite of what they claim. Third, Chief Economic Advisor Kevin Hassett tells national television that this war won't really hurt the economy, but it will hurt consumers. That third statement may be the single most analytically revealing thing said by any official all week. I'm going to break down all 3 of these developments with precision, because together they do not just describe a news cycle, they describe the complete trajectory of this conflict, where it came from, where it is heading, and what it is going to cost the people who have the least say in it. Let's start with what happened at the White House, on the margins of a St. Patrick's Day meeting with Irish leaders. A reporter asked Trump whether he was considering withdrawing the United States from NATO. His answer, delivered almost as an afterthought, deserves to be parsed word by word. I don't have anything in mind right now, but I will say that I was not exactly thrilled when we helped them with Ukraine. I've always wondered if NATO would ever be there for us. So that was a big test, and I don't need it. But they should have been there. And then the sentence that made every allied capital sit up. I don't need Congress for that decision. As you probably know, I can make that decision myself. Analyze the structure of what was just said. I don't have anything in mind. Plus, I can do it alone. Plus, they should have been there. Plus, it's something to think about. This is not a policy statement. It is a threat. And it is a threat that is internally incoherent in a way that is analytically significant. Trump is simultaneously saying 2 things that cannot both be true. He is saying the United States does not need NATO's help, and he is saying he is deeply frustrated that NATO did not help. Follow the logic. If you don't need help, you cannot be disappointed that people didn't help you. If you are disappointed that people didn't help you, then by definition you needed that help. These 2 positions are logically exclusive. You cannot hold both. What does it mean analytically when a leader holds 2 logically incompatible positions at the same time? It means the position is not the product of strategy. It is the product of frustration. And frustration in geopolitics is what emerges when your leverage is weaker than you expected it to be. Trump also posted on Truth Social. Most of our allies have made clear they don't want to be involved in our military operations against the terrorist regime of Iran. I've always considered NATO a one-way street. We protect them, but they do nothing for us. Set aside whether this framing of NATO is accurate. I'll address that shortly. Focus instead on the strategic situation this statement reveals. An administration that launched a military operation without consulting its allies, then threatened those allies when they declined to join, is now threatening to leave the alliance entirely if those allies still won't participate. This is not the behavior of a side with growing leverage. This is the behavior of a side whose leverage is contracting. When you have real leverage, you don't threaten to blow up the architecture you spent 80 years building. You use quiet pressure. Public ultimatums of this magnitude are the diplomatic equivalent of someone raising their voice because their argument is not working. Analytical honesty demands something that partisan commentary rarely offers: the acknowledgement that an argument you disagree with can still contain a valid piece. Trump does have a legitimate complaint when he says NATO members failed to meet their spending commitments for decades. This is documented. Many alliance members spent well below the 2% of GDP that represents NATO's minimum defense spending target. That is a real problem, and it was a problem long before Trump identified it. He also has a point when he observes that European nations perceive the war in Ukraine as a far more direct threat to them than the current conflict in the Middle East. Geography matters in threat perception. This is not an unreasonable observation. But here is the economic analysis that the "they owe us" framing consistently misses. When the United States supplied weapons to Ukraine, it was not performing international charity. Those weapons were manufactured by American defense firms. The contracts circulated through the American economy. The profits flowed to American companies listed on American stock exchanges. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, all of them saw revenues climb. And those weapons were simultaneously degrading the conventional military capability of Russia, which is the primary strategic adversary the United States has been positioned against since 1945. That is not philanthropy. That is a strategic investment with a calculable return. The rhetoric of "we do everything for them and they do nothing for us" is politically potent, but it is economically inaccurate. Now let's talk about something that has been treated as a footnote, but deserves far more analytical weight. The USS Gerald Ford is the most advanced aircraft carrier in the United States Navy. It costs over $13 billion. It was deployed to the Persian Gulf as a symbol of American military dominance, an iron demonstration of force projection capability. And this week, it caught fire. The fire destroyed up to 600 sleeping berths. Sailors are reportedly sleeping on floors and tables. An investigation is underway to determine whether this was a mechanical failure or sabotage. Reports indicate that some of the ship's plumbing systems had previously been blocked by clothing deliberately stuffed into toilets. There are 2 analytical lenses through which to read this. The first lens is infrastructural. American military equipment has become extraordinarily expensive and increasingly unreliable under real deployment conditions. A procurement system that rewards complexity and cost over durability and maintainability produces hardware that looks impressive in naval reviews and struggles in extended operations. The Ford-class carrier in particular has had well-documented issues with its advanced weapons elevators and other systems. Spectacle has been prioritized over serviceability. The second lens is human. These are very young men and women. Many of them were sent to Venezuela for one operation, then redirected directly into a conflict with Iran, rather than being rotated home as expected. They are now participating in a war that has already killed children in a school strike. The reported deliberate sabotage of plumbing systems, if confirmed, is not the behavior of a highly motivated and cohesive fighting force. It is the behavior of people who are expressing a grievance through the only means available to them. These two readings are not in competition. They are additive. And together, they describe a structural problem that goes far deeper than a single ship fire. A military whose hardware is enormously expensive but operationally fragile, and whose personnel have legitimate reasons for low morale. This is the section I want you to pay particular attention to, because it illustrates something that goes far beyond this specific conflict. It illustrates how true data can be used to construct false understanding. The statistic being celebrated in pro-war media circles is this: Iranian ballistic missile launches have fallen by more than 90%, from approximately 350 on February 28th to roughly 25 by March 14th. Drone launches followed the same curve, dropping from over 800 on day 1 to around 75 by day 15. The official interpretation? We have destroyed their capacity. Victory is near. The correct analytical interpretation? Stop. Think carefully about what these numbers actually mean. Iran possesses, by most estimates, between 2,000 and 3,000 ballistic missiles. At the launch rate of day 1, 350 missiles, Iran would have exhausted its entire ballistic missile arsenal in under 10 days. No military planner designing a sustained campaign of national defense would schedule their entire strategic deterrent to be fired in the first week and a half of a conflict. What day 1 looked like was not a maximum effort, it was a demonstration. Iran stated publicly, from the beginning of this conflict, that it intended to strike hard at the outset to demonstrate capability, then calibrate. This was not a secret strategy, it was a declared intention. The decline in launches is not evidence that American and Israeli strikes have degraded Iranian capability. It is evidence that Iran is executing exactly the strategy it announced. The shift now is toward more sophisticated munitions used more selectively, combined with the most powerful economic weapon in Iran's arsenal, the selective closure of the Strait of Hormuz. This does not require sophisticated ballistic missiles. It requires one drone hitting one tanker. Just the credible threat of that strike is sufficient to keep insurance premiums at astronomical levels and reroute global shipping. Compare this to what happened in Yemen. The United States, with the full spectrum of its military power, spent 90 days bombing the Houthis, an organization that is exponentially less well-resourced than Iran. Trump himself ultimately concluded a deal with them, and his own stated justification was that they were much tougher than expected because their missile and drone production was embedded inside mountains. Iran has spent 40 years building that exact same underground infrastructure, but at a scale the Houthis could never approach. Dispersed factories, tunnels beneath tunnels, redundant production nodes engineered to survive sustained aerial bombardment. What Hamas built in Gaza compared to Iranian underground infrastructure is, analytically, like comparing a garden pond to the Atlantic Ocean. The 90% decline is not a victory signal. It is the opening calibration of a long-game strategy. There was a fascinating intellectual development this week that reveals something important about how national security elites process information that conflicts with their preferred conclusions. An essay published in Al Jazeera, written by a professor at Doha, went viral in American national security circles. Its central argument was that the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is actually a depreciating asset for Iran, because 90% of Iranian oil exports route through Karg Island and the D3 Passage, and China, Iran's largest economic partner, cannot receive Iranian oil while the strait is closed. Therefore, the argument ran, Iran is cutting off its own economic lifeline. This essay was cited in Politico Playbook. It circulated through major policy networks. It was treated as a sophisticated corrective to the narrative that Hormuz closure hurts the West. There is one problem. It contains a fundamental factual error. Tanker tracking data and satellite monitoring confirm that Iran has shipped at least 11.7 million barrels of oil to China since February 28th. Every barrel went to China. The D3 passage is not closed in the way a drawbridge is closed. It functions as a selective control system. Ships Iran wants to pass through, pass through. Ships Iran wants to block, are blocked. The selective closure of the Strait of Hormuz does not cut Iranian oil revenues. It redirects and concentrates them, while simultaneously maximizing economic damage to adversaries. What is analytically troubling is not the essay itself. Flawed analysis gets published regularly. What is troubling is the eagerness with which it was adopted and circulated by the very establishment that got Iran wrong in the first place. Before the conflict began, the prevailing argument in American policy circles was, Iran will never close the strait because they need it too much themselves. That argument was proved wrong on February 28th. The same logical error, assuming Iran won't take a costly action because it would hurt Iran, has now reappeared in a new form, dressed in new evidence, and is being circulated with the same confidence. Elites who have been wrong do not search for the analysis that tells them where they were wrong. They search for the analysis that tells them they were right after all. That is not intelligence. That is its opposite. And now we arrive at what I consider the single most analytically revealing statement of the entire week. Kevin Hassett, the chief economic advisor to the Trump administration, appeared on CNBC. He was asked directly, if this disruption lasts months, can the American economy absorb it without recession? His answer, the American economy is fundamentally sound. If it prolongs, it wouldn't really disrupt the American economy that much. It would hurt consumers, and we'd need to think about that if it continued. But that's really the last of our worries right now because we're very confident things are moving ahead of schedule. Read that again. It wouldn't really disrupt the American economy, but it would hurt consumers. Let me offer a brief lesson in the economic concepts being casually violated here. In standard macroeconomic accounting, personal consumption expenditure, what consumers spend, represents approximately 70% of American GDP. Consumer spending is not a component of the economy. It is the economy's largest single engine. The idea that you can injure consumers significantly without disrupting the economy is not a nuanced position. It is a category error. Unless, of course, you are operating under a different conception of what the economy is. And here is where Hassett inadvertently exposed something important. There exists a vision of the economy, not openly stated but structurally embedded in how certain institutions operate, in which the economy means stock market valuations, corporate profit margins, capital flows, and asset prices. In that vision, yes, it is theoretically possible for markets to remain stable while consumers suffer. We saw it happen during COVID-19. Markets recovered within months. Low-wage workers experienced years of sustained economic damage. What Hassett said, inadvertently and on national television, was, the economy we monitor and protect, markets, corporate valuations, can survive this. The people, the consumers, are going to hurt. And that is the last of our concerns. That is a precise articulation of who this administration's economic policy is designed to serve. Not through ideological declaration, through casual admission, in an unguarded moment, in response to a simple question. And those consumers, the people paying more for gasoline, for groceries, for heating, vote in midterm elections. Hassett also made one more claim that demands examination. The situation is moving ahead of schedule. Let's test that against available data. The administration indicated the operation would take 4 to 6 weeks. We are currently 2 weeks in. During this same period, Israeli military sources told Fox News it will take several more weeks to destroy ballistic missile capacity, and Iran can still launch dozens of missiles per day at will. American officials have been unable to name a single country that has agreed to send naval vessels for a coalition force. Oil is trading at $100 per barrel. The IEA has released the largest emergency oil reserve draw in its history, an extreme measure designed to prevent market collapse. Dubai, a global financial hub, has had its airport targeted and its oil terminals struck twice in 48 hours. In what specific, measurable dimension is this ahead of schedule? The analytical answer, stated plainly, is this. The claim is not supported by publicly available evidence. And crucially, if it were true, it would be simple to document. Name the coalition members, show the maritime routes reopening, present evidence of serious negotiations. The absence of that evidence is itself data. Let me synthesize everything into the conclusion these developments collectively demand. Signal 1 tells us about leverage. An administration that launched a war without consulting allies, then threatened those allies for declining to join, is now threatening to dismantle the entire alliance if those allies still won't follow. That is the behavior of a side whose leverage is shrinking, not growing. Real leverage is quiet. Desperation is loud. Signal 2 tells us about information. A true statistic, presented without context, deployed to support a false conclusion, distributed aggressively through networks that prefer reassurance over accuracy. This is one of the most operationally dangerous forms of misinformation. Not fabricated data, but real data interpreted in a way that inverts its meaning. The 90% decline is Iran's strategy working, not Iran's strategy failing. Signal 3 tells us about values. The clearest statement of priorities this administration has made about this war was not delivered in a policy speech. It was delivered casually, on a cable business channel, in response to a routine question. The economy will be fine. Consumers will hurt. That's the last of our worries. That statement tells you who the decision makers are accountable to, and it is not the people who fill their cars with gas, buy their groceries, and pay their heating bills. This war was sold as a short, decisive operation, 4 to 6 weeks, ahead of schedule. Victory is near. Every available indicator, the refusal of allies to join, the resilience of Iranian missile infrastructure, the inability to name a single concrete achievement on the announced timeline, the $100 oil price, the emergency reserve releases, the aircraft carrier fire, the absence of popular uprising inside Iran. Every single one of these indicators points in the same direction. This is not ahead of schedule. This is the beginning of something that the administration did not fully model. Against an adversary that has spent 4 decades preparing for exactly this scenario, in an economic environment where the people who will absorb the costs are the last of anyone's concerns.